everybody. My name is Angel Chapple, and you are tuned in to another episode of Truth Be Told First Autos Part 2. This book should be in the home of every black family, every entrepreneur, every American home. Okay? And if you would like to purchase this book, you can do so by going to stalwartpublications.com. I will type that in the caption here somewhere as well. stalwartpublications.com. So, if you're just tuning in, allow me to introduce you to this wonderful book, First Black Autos by Henry A. May. I will give a quick recap. However, you can catch part one here, clicking the link above to get the full story. The main character, C.R. Patterson, escaped slavery, all right, crossed the Ohio River, right, in search of freedom. And once reaching Ohio, he utilized his skill set that he was utilizing on the plantation to hire himself out as a worker in order to create income for himself. After that, he became widely known in the area, so much so that a lot of people hired him for jobs, and he even went into partnership with a white male, J.P. Lowe. Together they formed the company J.P. Lowe and Company. After Lowe died, C.R. Patterson did buy his interest and renamed the company C.R. Patterson Blacksmith and Carriage Company. C.R. Patterson was married and he had 5 children, and he became a pillar in the Greenfield, Ohio community. C.R. Patterson was doing very well at creating carriages and buggies. And he, being the forward thinker that he was figuring out what is going to be next, right? Like many of you and I, even in the times that we are living in right now, we are thinking to ourselves, what's next? During that time, the industrial era began. And so this is when, steel and oil was being found, okay? A side note here, during that time, John D. Rockefeller was heavy in the oil industry, also controlling much of the world's wealth, right? So because of this creation of oil, C.R. Patterson had a dream to create a horseless carriage, what we call a car. So there were many parts and pieces to creating a car. As many of us know, we have our own vehicles, and we know that there are several parts that go along with being able to drive our vehicle. And so C.R. Patterson did not know how. However, he had a dream that he would. And so I find it very interesting that the author credits other black inventors during this era as well. One being Elijah McCoy, as we have heard the term the real McCoy, all right? He has 57 patents, all right? Related to the lubrication of steam engines. He created oil cups that were used to lubricate the piston rods, wheel bearings, and other parts. This made it easy for someone to travel down the road without having to stop and manually lubricate these parts over and over again. Mentions Albert R. Robinson, who made an improvement to the electric battery of the train lines. He also credits Richard Spikes, who made a unique improvement to the automatic gear shifting system. Not only that, but he also created the turn signals, right? How important is that? And this man, at the age of 84, created the safety braking system at 84. Okay? This is amazing to me for several reasons. First, I would like to bring to your attention that all of these men, engineers, in their own uniqueness, were a part of something much bigger. And can you imagine that they probably didn't know each other, right? Like they probably didn't know that, oh, so-and-so down in South Carolina is working on this, and so-and-so up in Canada is working on this, right? But together during this time frame, they were all working on certain things that they were given to do, right? They were all in their own lane. They weren't worried about, they weren't looking at each other as competition, but they all had something profound that they were put here in the earth to create, to birth, literally, right? Now imagine you and I do the same thing. It's so easy to hear or to see that somebody is working on something in a similar industry and we get discouraged and we feel like, oh, well, I'm not going to carry on with my part because so-and-so is doing this or whatever the case may be. And here it was, they were all working on something totally separate but was important to a final product. Can you imagine? Imagine if we all did the same, how much more we could create as a community and as a people. The author credits Garrett A. Morgan, whom I did a previous story on, and if you click this link up here, you can catch more of his story. But he created the traffic light signal, amongst many other things as well. And I just find it so profound that Black men were ahead of the game. They were on it. They were the innovators of the times. They were the innovators of American history that has never been told properly. This time as well, the Wright brothers were working on building an aircraft. All right. That part y'all did get. Y'all got that story. But all these other ones, y'all didn't get it. It's okay though. Y'all gonna learn today. And so C.R. Patterson was thinking, how to build this horseless carriage, how to build this car. And so he would talk to his sons day in and day out, saying, that they had everything that they needed. Oh my God. Woo! Do you hear me? He didn't even know. He didn't even know how to build it. But he knew that he had everything that he needed. That is a message right there, okay? Ooh, I get excited. I need to get a fan, y'all. I'm getting me a church fan, okay? Anyway, let me get back to the story. I gotta stay with the story. So, whoo. Woo. Okay, so every day he invested in his sons, teaching and showing them things, right? As far as the company goes. And so the company became more successful and he renamed it C.R. Patterson and Sons. One of the things, though, that was very important to Mr. Patterson was the education of his boys. He realized that this was an important factor, being that he himself did not have an education, and he recalled his parents also being slaves and not ever receiving an education. And he did not want the same for his children. And so he signed them up to attend a school there in Ohio. However, his son Frederick was denied admission. Okay. Because of this, C.R. Patterson hired a lawyer and filed a suit against the Board of Trustees and Superintendent of Greenfield High School. During the time that the case was pending, he sent his boys off to Philadelphia where they stayed with relatives and attended their first year in high school. A year passed and the case was settled in their favor. And so the school ended up having to pay for the legal fees and court costs. And so Frederick was the first African American student to integrate and graduate from the high school there. He attended college at Ohio State University. There he also was the first African American to integrate the football team. Okay? So for all of you ballers, all of you athletes that, came through and walked through Ohio State University, you owe it to Frederick Patterson. All right? He did graduate with his degree in education. After that, he moved to Hopkinsville, Kentucky. He worked for 2 years there. He married a beautiful black woman named Esteline, all right, and they had 2 sons. And so I imagine, maybe he missed being at home, maybe he missed the life of working on cars. And so he and his family packed up and they moved back home with his mother and father there in Greenfield, Ohio, and they began to help take over the business. So Esteline was in charge of doing the bookkeeping, and of course Frederick and his father were part of the design and manufacturing of the cars. And because of this, business became even more successful. And in 1912, C.R. Patterson became ill and he was bedridden. And in the same year, he also passed away. And this was very devastating for the family because the business was really doing well. Here, you have your patriarch, you have your visionary of the company, and now he is no longer with you, working beside you. And so this was very, very tough. This was a big hit for the family. However, they knew that in order to continue to thrive and to make it, that they would have to continue on with the business. And so they pushed through the grief. Frederick called a board meeting, called the family members together, and they began to discuss just exactly how they were going to move the family business forward and build their first car. And so the plan was approved. First thing was to figure out exactly how they were going to put these parts together, how now were they going to utilize the wheels that were going to turn the car since there was no longer a horse that was going to do it, or what was going to steer, since there was no need for the reins anymore, all right? And so all of these things they had to figure out, through trial and error, through experimentation, all of that. They were determined to see his father's vision come to pass. They went to work. They began to renovate the buildings and changing things up so that they had the space that was necessary to build the car. And during this time, one of the areas in which they did the work was kind of in the back of the garage because they didn't want people to know what it was that they were working on at the time. However, some of the workers who were working on the project couldn't keep it to themselves. And so, some of their families knew, of course. And so often a lot of people would walk by passing the garage just to be nosy because you know how we are. To see what was going on. And so because they couldn't actually see what was going on, that's another message right there, right? That's another message. A lot of times, we get this vision, we get this plan, we get this dream, right, that only we can see, right? And so everybody who's on the bypass, they might get a whiff of it. and they get a whiff of it and they can't see, then they start to talk about things that they can't understand, right? But guess what Frederick did? He kept working anyhow. They keep passing by onlookers, snapping their nose up. Oh, he ain't building no car. Where is that? You know? And after time passed, you know, I imagine he probably got wearied, like many of us do. It's natural, right? However, if you've been given and granted a vision for it, it shall come true. So they kept working day in and day out. And you'll have to get the book so that you can read the details of their experiment, right? Because I don't have time to go through all of that. And I want to save a little bit of the story for your own enjoyment. However, on September 23rd, 1915, Frederick Patterson and his team had completed the project. And here you see they are in their first car. That is called the touring car. And they also made roadsters. How amazing that day must have been for Frederick, his team, and his family. That after 3 years that his father had passed away, that they were able to fulfill his dream and vision for the company. C.R. Patterson, he didn't live to see that day, but I imagine he saw it enough whenever he was given that dream. And because of the rearing, the education, the workmanship that he instilled in his sons, they were able to carry on his legacy. I think that this is so profound for Black men and their children and their sons and their families, for all of us. Because at the end of the day, if we as parents have not cultivated our children in a way that when it is our time to go and we hand them the baton and they cannot run and finish the race, that we have failed them. Oh, what a legacy C.R. Patterson created for his family. Y'all gonna have to forgive me now. I get a little teary-eyed when I tell these stories, you hear? Because they're just so empowering, okay? And so, you can imagine a day it was, because this was a day that all the rumors were silenced, right? They was all, shh. What you say, Miss Birdie? What did you say? Yeah, you was talking that, you ain't talking that now. No, but I just cannot imagine the relief that he also felt, right, from the pressure that he had to not just fulfill the goal, but also to overcome the negativity around him. And so this was just a great day. You know, they took the car out for a test drive. You know, from that day forward, they were able to make even more advancements on the car, you know, with regards to detail and its mechanical integrity. And so word was out that the Pattersons was the thing to buy, okay? Like, you know how y'all be, I don't know what cars, you know, some of y'all, you know, people like the Chargers, what, I don't know. But back then, it was a Greenfield Patterson, okay? All right, and so business began to boom even more now during this era for C.R. Patterson and Son. He began to buy more equipment, buy more engines from a nearby company, and would have it transported through the Detroit train and depot line, which was only a few blocks away from the shop. So it's very convenient. You know, if you ordered a part, it was maybe, 2 days at the most. And so, he's able to build and produce. And so during this time, as you can imagine, people were big on, if they were spending their money on something, they wanted to make sure that it was quality. And so the Patterson Greenfield vehicles stood out the most, amongst their other competitors. There were a lot of other competitors at this time. Mobile, Willys, Winton, Chevrolet, Ford, a few of those I haven't even heard. So some of those did not make it, against the other brands because they just did not have that quality. And again, you'll have to get this book to find out what set the Greenfield Patterson's model out the most. Said to be much better than Ford's Model T vehicle. Okay? And so, as their reputation began to build, so did their sales. Until in 1921, Henry Ford decided to buy the GT&I Railroad, the same railroad that Frederick Patterson was getting his parts shipped. Henry Ford spent money to, make advances, to the railroad line. And so one day, he came across, the train making a certain stop. And it was there, for several minutes at a time. And he inquired about what that stop was. And when he found out that it was, in fact, a competitor who was receiving parts and products on that line that he now owned, he put a stop to it. This was devastating to Frederick. And he did not know what he was going to do at this point. Back with us for part 3 to find out whether or not the Patterson and Sons company can outlast this huge defeat. Gotcha. No, I'm not going to leave y'all hanging like that because this story, we're going to leave it on a high note right here, okay? However, this was a huge hit, okay? This was, Henry Ford pouring salt on the Pattersons' game, literally trying to put them out of business. Like, who does that? How do you literally put a stop? How do you discriminate against someone else's being able to get parts on a train line? Just like America. Just like America. However, Frederick Patterson was determined. He didn't come this far to let Henry Ford put him out, all right? And so, it just so happened he was able to find another company, Baltimore and Ohio Train Company, to ship his parts. The B&O Railroad was owned by a man named Edward Harriman. And so this man was in the business of buying out railroads and owning them, right, and purchasing them in order to increase his holdings. So this man was a businessman. He didn't care who was shipping what, who was buying what, who you was, none of that, long as you paid your fees. So this alternative worked out in Frederick's favor. It wasn't as convenient as the other railroad. However, it was enough for him to continue his work. And ain't that like God? Woo! Always providing a ram in the bush. It's at moments like this when we think that we've hit a bump in the road, or we've ran into a wall and there is no turning back, or there is no way forward. And yet somehow, with just enough will and determination, we find a way. And so if you, on your journey of entrepreneurship or wherever you may be in your life, know that if you have been given a task or something to accomplish and to get done, we have already established that you have everything that you need. But outside of that, any roadblocks that you may face have to get out of your way, because you got work to do. Just like Frederick and his company, they had work to do now. They were back in business. And so I find it ironic that author points out something quite interesting about the railroads. So the new railroad, the B&O railroad that Frederick Patterson was now utilizing to get his equipment and his parts, crossed over the DT&I railroad that Henry Ford now owned, right? Isn't that something? Crossed over. Why is we preaching, Lord? Isn't that something? Henry Ford, just like that roadblock, right, that we was just talking about, he tried to stop his competitor. He thought he had put an end, right, to his competition. Oh, but there was another way. There was another way in which all he had to do was just cross over. And that's exactly what happened. His parts crossed over that DT&I railroad, and they was able to go on about their business. It didn't stop nothing. Your enemies can't stop nothing. They just got to lay down and watch you cross over. Ooh, yes, won't he do it? And they continue to make their custom Patterson and Greenfield cars. Along with, they began to service vehicles. Here's another ironic piece. Much of the cars that the Pattersons were having to fix and repair were Fords. Were Fords. What? What'd you say? Yes. This just goes to show. I ain't gonna try to pull nothing out of that, baby. You read between the lines. Okay? You read between the lines. Create your own story here. Place yourself here. Okay? Anything is possible. And when you have been given something to do, can't nobody stop you. And I'm going to show you this here. Here is an ad that I think is really neat during that time that they posted. You see Patterson Service Automotive. So now they're advertising that they are doing repairs. And in it says, "Be wise, consult Patterson." That's the end of part 2. Won't you come back and learn more about this wonderful story? Stay tuned for part 3.